Germany after the Great War resembled a wrecked car. When it seemed that things couldn't get worse, the communists arrived with tools, ready to fix everything. But everyone feared they would turn the country into a Soviet tank. This means that if Germany had become communist after the Great War instead of nationalist, it would likely have become an ally of the Soviet Union. Considering how these countries performed in World War II, one might wonder if they could have conquered the world and made it communist. One way Germany could become communist is through Spartacus's successful power grab, perhaps due to a more successful uprising in Berlin in January 1919. This uprising lasted only a week and was suppressed by the Freikorps, but without them, Spartacus could have truly seized power in Germany. The problem with this scenario is that if it succeeded, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht would likely have had a strong influence on the new country with their ideology. Despite the fact that it would lead Germany to communism, Rosa Luxemburg did not support Lenin and the Bolsheviks. She believed it would be a miracle if the Bolsheviks could seize Germany, as they were extremely incompetent. We will never know how Spartacus could have seized power in Germany, and whether they would have collaborated with the Soviet Union, which would have made the scenario less exciting. Instead, I propose a more plausible and interesting option for this alternative history. I also made a video about how the Bavarian Soviet Republic could have succeeded, and there, I raised the same question, that the Freikorps would not have been sent, so it would be a repetition. Historically, there were many communist uprisings in Germany during the German Revolution, and on the screen you can see the most famous ones and the number of days they lasted. As it turns out, on average, they did not last even a month. For example, the Soviet Republic of Osa existed for only 12 days before being absorbed by France. What if all these communist uprisings, as well as many others, had been successful? What if everything had gone perfectly for the communists in Germany? Historically, there was no Communist Party in Germany until 1919, and it was formed just before the Spartacist uprising, in which it actively participated. All German communists had an anti-war approach. For example, the Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany split from the Social Democratic Party, which at that time supported the war. My point of divergence is the strike in Germany in January 1918. The strike was caused by food shortages, fatigue from the war, and the subsequent October Revolution in Russia, which inspired the Germans to revolt and create a Marxist Germany. The Independent Social Democratic Party supported this strike, aiming to end the war. More than 1 million people participated in the strike at key industrial enterprises, making it a significant event. One of the main issues for Imperial Germany was how the Germans dealt with the strike. The most important event was the arrest of its leaders and their sending to the front, which undoubtedly worsened the situation. If the suppression of the strike had been harsher, it could have made the Communist Party more popular. In the end, the Socialist Party of Independent Workers of Germany opposed the war, and around 1 million workers openly supported them. This step of sending people to the front could quickly spiral out of control, making more workers less sympathetic to the communists and possibly pushing them to join. In the mid-1980s, most workers and even the public in Germany were against the war, considering the mentioned resource shortages, rising poverty, and the fact that the country was on the losing side. Thus, I can assume that the Socialist Party of Independent Workers and the Spartacus League could have created the Communist Party of Germany much earlier and would have received more support from workers wanting to end the war. The German communists were firmly against the war even before it began, and their call for peace and bread, like the Bolsheviks, would have made them especially popular among the working class. Especially appealing would be the promise of the Council of Workers' Deputies and collective leadership, where workers would own the factories and profits would be distributed among them rather than to owners or shareholders. Theoretically, these workers could democratically elect leaders in an organized structure and remove them at any time. This would at least be a promise to the people, allowing the Communist Party to lay a strong foundation and ensure even greater support. However, everything changed when Antelman published a statement in the newspaper that caused a stir in Germany. Comrades, workers, compatriots, and soldiers at the front, I call for the end of this senseless war. Only the Kaiser and the aristocracy will benefit from her victory, while we, the simple workers and soldiers, pay the price. Regardless of whether Imperial Germany wins or not, we remain the losers in this system. I came from the front. I rose up with 4 brave comrades. I fought in battles in Champagne, on the Somme, and in other battles for more than 3 years, and today I deserted, realizing that it is not my compatriots and workers who will win, but the Kaiser and the elite. Workers, soldiers, compatriots, unite. We must put an end to the senseless war that has brought poverty and hunger to the people of Germany, but most importantly, punish those who started it and profit from it. I dream of a great Germany where workers and ordinary people will benefit from this system. I call on all workers to join the organized strike organized by the Communist Party and all soldiers at the front to revolt, to see their families again. With this message, Antalman became a unifying force for the left socialist parties, much like the Austrian artist united the German people. Nationalist and militarist parties gained strength because the left socialist parties failed to unite and collaborate effectively. This situation could change, as I mentioned earlier, and his message could strike Germany like a bomb, spreading with tremendous speed. I assume it will be published at the end of October, just in time for the Kiel Mutiny of November 3rd, 1918, which, in historical perspective, will be even more successful. The Kiel Mutiny occurred because sailors were ordered to carry out a nearly suicidal mission, as Germany sought to decisively defeat the British fleet on the open sea, which was extremely risky for German military efforts. These sailors and soldiers refused to follow orders and organized the Kiel Mutiny, creating a workers' council and spreading their message throughout Germany. It would sound like this: fellow countrymen, we are sailors from Kiel, and we have been ordered to carry out a suicidal attack so that His Majesty the Kaiser can win the war, while the real losers will be those who fought and have already died. We rejected these orders and successfully took control of Kiel, establishing the Soviet Republic. You can do the same. Long live the German Soviet Republic. Let's unite and stop the war, punishing those who started it. This message in an alternative history would strengthen the faith of ordinary workers in the necessity of peace and that the German imperial family should no longer be supported. Workers were promised control over their factories and profit, leading to the start of a communist revolution across Germany. Unlike our history, two major uprisings would have occurred in just 2 weeks, one in Kiel and another among the sailors. In this alternate reality, riots would spiral out of control. Soldiers and workers would follow the organized strike of the Communist Party of Germany. Soldiers would safely desert or surrender on the party's orders, while workers would seize all military production or even sabotage it. This would have undermined the German Empire and forced it to sign a peace treaty earlier than in our history, as the Kaiser sought to resolve internal issues and maintain his power. Of course, this happened before the Treaty of Versailles was written, which later exiled him and stripped him of all titles. With this dent, Germany would have won World War I, but my story is not over, as I want to tell how Germany became communist, about its alliance with the Soviet Union and the subsequent division of Poland between them, as well as the beginning of World War II right after the end of World War I. The German Soviet Republic would have been proclaimed, and sailors from Kiel would have sent a delegation to support this Soviet Republic, hoping that France would not annex them. But, unfortunately, it would have been short-lived, as the communists in Germany could not protect them yet. What will soon happen will be described in history books as the German November, or November of Germany. A revolution similar to the October Revolution in Russia could occur in Germany. Interestingly, the October Revolution actually took place in November, but got its name due to calendar differences. Imagine Germany openly revolting and trying to become a communist country exactly 1 year after the Bolsheviks. I assume that the Communist Party of Germany could strengthen its positions, especially in the north of the country, as the uprising in Hamburg could also be successful. Historically, this event occurred in 1923. Which is 5 years later, but given the situation, it could have happened much earlier, and these communist uprisings could have been successful, as the German Empire lacked enough soldiers and resources to fight them. At that moment, the people were tired of the Hohenzollern dynasty and its orders. I remind you that in January 1918, a nationwide strike protest occurred, in which about 1 million workers participated. The emperor ordered the arrest of the strike leaders and send them to the front. The workers would become more cautious in trusting the Kaiser, realizing they could be pawns in his game, victims forced to fight against other workers. This would lead to more workers and soldiers of World War I joining the Communist Party of Germany rather than the German Empire. This would mean that the empire would have fewer soldiers and workers for military production, making its defeat inevitable. This would further encourage communist supporters to rise up across the country. Thus, the uprising in the Ruhr could have occurred much earlier and been successful, connecting with Bremen and Hamburg. The Soviet Republic in Munich and Viborg would have formed the Bavarian Soviet Republic, which I have already detailed in another video. In this turmoil, many workers from Ireland would also join the communist cause. In the chaos, the Freikorps could seize the central government by capturing Berlin. This happened because the German Empire sent the Freikorps to suppress the uprisings, but the Freikorps and similar nationalist groups were also dissatisfied with the Kaiser for ending the war too early. believing they could have won. The Kaiser started a war for the Freikorps, and when things didn't go as planned, he tried to use any means to maintain his power. The Freikorps also wanted to continue the Great War, making their support for the Kaiser seem absurd. In the end, they seized power and arrested the German royal family, effectively starting a civil war in Germany between communists and nationalists. However, the Freikorps made a fatal mistake by capturing Berlin. They wasted numerous resources, which allowed the uprisings to strengthen instead of suppressing them. This meant that the communists had now taken stronger positions, and the alternative civil war began to resemble the Russian Civil War. I acknowledge that I drew inspiration from events related to the communists, who understood that by capturing Berlin, they would secure control over all of Germany. This became their immediate goal, especially considering that the communists had many veterans in their ranks and controlled much of the production in the country. They could assemble an army larger than the Freikorps. Two sides met in the Berlin area, in the city of Potsdam, but the communists from Saxony and Thuringia moved north, surrounding Potsdam and most of the Freikorps' troops. This opened the way to Berlin, and the civil war in Germany would have ended before the start of the civil war in Russia. The workers of Germany would be liberated, and the country would consist of small communist republics united in German councils. Nevertheless, Germany has not yet signed the Versailles Peace Treaty, which was drafted in 1919, almost a year after the end of the war. This would cause outrage, and the peace treaty for Germany would be much harsher than in our historical timeline. In reality, the Paris Conference did not punish Germany severely to prevent its shift towards communism, but rather to make it a buffer against communism. This time there was no such necessity, so I expect France to try to expand its borders, possibly forming a protectorate in the Rhine region. However, I doubt that this will really happen due to the ideas of self-determination introduced by Woodrow Wilson, and I do not see the allies of France supporting such an idea. Believe it or not, Dante actually sought to prevent World War II, and even World War I was called the war to end all wars. Therefore, Britain would prefer that Germany retain its territories, as if France were to capture them. It would guarantee that Germany would attempt to reclaim them in the future, potentially leading to World War II. Something both Britain and especially America wanted to avoid. Italy would support France's claims if they, in turn, supported Italy's demands in Dalmatia. But this would not be enough, as Britain and America would have greater influence on shaping the peace treaty. A League of Nations would also be created, and I expect France and Italy to be outraged, but unable to do anything about it for now. France could not simply continue the war with Germany, as there were indeed rebellions among French soldiers, many of whom held socialist and communist views. Thus, if France invaded a socialist country, a significant portion of French soldiers might desert or switch sides, potentially leading to a civil war in France. Therefore, France would limit Germany in other ways, aiming for greater control over its military actions and reducing the size of its army, which would be accepted on the Western Front. The peace treaty would look identical, but in the East, Poland would soon find itself in conflict with the Soviet Union, leading to the Polish-Soviet War from 1919 to 1921. In the future, we will examine this in more detail, but regarding Germany, it will strengthen its power and fulfill its promises to its people by seizing factories and handing them over to workers who will profit. A system of councils will also be created. One can quickly assume that Germany will have less competent rulers, as they will be chosen for their ideological loyalty rather than professional qualities, which will limit the country's potential. However, as I mentioned, the workers will vote for their rulers and can demand extraordinary elections at any time to remove them from office. Germany will likely implement an improved version of communism compared to the Soviet Union, as power will truly belong to the workers, rather than establishing a communist dictatorship. Stalin could become the first leader of the German Soviet republics, and historically, he was a supporter and ally of the Soviet Union. In 1923, he even met with Lenin, and in this alternative reality, it could have happened much earlier.